I'm sure you've noticed when you boot up Fedora, you don't get an option to select anything else. You get no menu. It boots you straight into the operating system, into the login screen. We'll talk about how we can change that. I like to have a little bit more control than what Fedora gives us. The first thing is we've got to get into a terminal session. So we'll open terminal. And then I need to get over to the root user. Okay, so you see the pound sign that indicates that it is the root user. Plus you see root over here. And again, I'm in the home directory of the root user. Now I want to change to the location of the Grub bootloader. Let's take a look at what's there, and you'll see that there is the grub.conf file. That's one of the files that can be modified to change the Grub configurations. Another file is called menu.list. That's what's used by SUSE. Notice that the colors are a little bit different in this one. This one is a blue and splash is a red. The colors indicate that the file is different in some way. The red indicates it's a compressed file, like a zip file or a tar file. The blue indicates that it's a link, and we haven't studied links yet, but you'll understand that later. So let's look at it in a little bit different way with the -L. So again, you can see that the colors still are true, the blue and the red, but now notice there's a little arrow that points over to the current directory with the /grub.conf, and all the way over here with the permissions, this area, you notice that it starts with an L, meaning that is a link. So we're going to go in and modify the grub.conf file, and we're going to use a text editor that you haven't been introduced to yet. You will learn more detail on this, probably more than you want to know, in a later chapter. It's called VI. VI. So we're going to type VI space grub.conf. Notice there's a lot of lines up here that start with a pound sign. That pound sign indicates that it's a comment. Anything that you start with a pound sign, the system will ignore it because it considers it a comment. So let's take a look at a few of these things. Remember, the default meant which item in the list it was going to select. And remember, in computer language, 0 is the first one instead of number 1. Then we've got the timeout is set for 0. That means that it's not going to pause at all. It's just going to automatically go into the operating system. Then we've got the splash image, and that tells us what the actual image is that's going to be displayed after the boot up finishes. Then notice hidden menu. By default, that's enabled, so we're going to have to comment that out in order to be able to see the menu. Then we see the term title, and you tell it it's a Fedora, and here's all the information on it. Root, where is the root drive? It's on the first hard drive on the first partition. Then it gives the kernel information that this operating system is going to be using. Notice the initrd, that's the one that creates the RAM disk and loads a small version of Linux. So now you've seen a little bit about it. Let's make some changes to it. In order to make a change in this, I have to type the letter I. Now notice, insert pops up at the bottom. That means I'm now in edit mode. I can insert, delete, change, whatever, anything that I need to. So I'm going to come up here to hidden. I was just trying to use my mouse, which doesn't work. All you have in the VI command is your keyboard. This has been around for much longer than what the mouse has been here. Take a little bit of time getting used to on this one. Okay, so now we've commented out the hidden menu, so that means the menu will show up when you first boot your system, but it's going to just flash across the screen because at this point we've got the timeout set to 0. So I'm going to come over to the 0 and I'm going to change that to 10. That means it's going to wait 10 seconds before it automatically picks the default setting, which is up here on this line. So at this point, we have now changed to where we can see the menu. It will wait 10 seconds before it picks the default operating system. And in this case, right now, there's only one, the Fedora. So when the menu shows up, that's all we would see. So let's add another one. And we're going to add another title. And let's call it floppy disk. That way you could create a floppy disk to boot from, and you would have the option to pick that option from the menu. Now we have to put the root information. So we type root, and in this case we're going to use a little bit different command. It's called root no verify. And then we're going to put the drive that it's on. And since you don't partition floppy drives, there's no partition number. What that root no verify means is the system doesn't have to recognize the OS for it to boot from it. You would use this like if you were going to boot a Windows system, for instance. Then we go to the chain loader and we put +1, which means that it's going to read one sector from the start of the partition that allows it to boot from a floppy. Okay, so we have changed the hidden menu. We've commented that out, so now we'll see the menu. We've changed the timeout to 10, so before the default selection is made, then we have a chance to change something. We've also added the option of booting from a floppy disk. To get out of the insert mode, you hit escape, then a colon to get you into the command line tool, and type exit. That's how you get in and out of Vi, and a very quick little tutorial on it. So now in order to reboot, we can do this using the init6 command. And you'll learn a little bit more about that in a future lesson too. So init6 is the same thing as doing a reboot. Now notice 7, 6, 5, I'm going to hit one of my arrow keys left or right. I could have actually hit any key on the keyboard and it would have stopped the countdown. So now we are at the Grub menu option. So we have a choice of either booting into Fedora or to the floppy disk. Notice Fedora is your first on the list, so that's what the default boot is going to be. Notice the text underneath the box. Use the up and down arrows to select which entry is highlighted. Press Enter to boot to the selected OS. You can use the letter E to edit commands before you boot. You could press A to modify kernel arguments before booting, or C to go into a command line. Let's talk a little bit about the A command, modify the kernel arguments. One of the things that we'll cover shortly is the run level. So if you wanted to, you could change the run level. I'm going to press the A key, and it takes you to a prompt that allows you to make modifications to the kernel. If I wanted to change to, say, run level 3, I would just type a number 3 at the end of that line and hit enter. But I don't want to make that change. Let's select the Fedora and boot into it. Now that our system has rebooted, I will sign in. And we're going to add a little bit more to our Grub conf file. If you want to password protect this file, you'll need to modify it again and add a couple more commands. So let's get logged in first, and then we'll go to a command prompt, and then we'll go to a terminal session. First thing that we need to do is open a terminal session. I like to use the terminal session rather than the console because it gives me a nice white background. And I also have some options in the pull-down menus. So the first thing that we have to do is log in as the root user. And again, remember, we know that we're in as root because we have the pound sign. Okay, now we're going to use a different text editor to make further modifications. This editor is called gedit. And rather than changing to the directory, we're just going to go ahead and type it all out. I'm going to use a ampersand to indicate that I want it to run in the background so that I can continue to use my shell prompt. And I hit enter, and it brings up my gedit application. You can see from here that the changes that we made earlier are still there. They were saved. Notice we've got our floppy disk information now. So now let's consider putting a password on this. Be much safer if we could protect it to where only a certain number of people would have this password in order to get into the GrubConf and make any changes. So let's come up here and we type the word password. Now, of course, I could continue and put a password in there, but if I did that, it's going to be sitting in clear text. And if anybody got their hands on the grub.conf file, then they would have the password. So let's encrypt it. So we're going to go back to the terminal window. We're going to use a command to encrypt the password. Now we enter the new password and we retype it. That password has been encrypted. That big long line of characters is the encrypted password. So what I'm going to do is highlight that, and I'm going to edit and copy. Then I'm going to go back over to the gedit, and I'm going to go behind the word password that we had just used, and I'm going to put --md5, and then I'm going to paste that long string or the encrypted password in there. Okay, so now we've established that we're using an encrypted password, and that there is one, but at this point we haven't really applied it anywhere. We come down to right before root and put lock. So before anything happens, when we select Fedora, it will automatically ask you for a password. Okay, let's do the same thing on the floppy disk. Now we have set a password and we've told it where we want the screen to get locked and request a password. So from here we save our file, close the gedit, and now in order for this to take effect we have to reboot the system again. So we're going to type the init space 6 again to force a reboot, and then again we'll wait until it restarts. Now we have our system booted up. You notice that the text underneath the box has changed a little bit. You can use the arrows again to move around, but you have to use the P in order to enter a password and have it unlock it. So now we type the password. Notice again it's not in clear text. And now it takes you back to the original menu that you saw last time with the E and the A and the C. E for edit the commands before booting, A for modifying the kernel arguments, or C for going into a command line. So at this point, let's hit the E and let's just see what happens. It brings up the portion that was under the title Fedora. You've got your lock, you've got root, the kernel information, and the initRD image that you're going to use. You can modify anything on there You can even add new lines to it. The O opens a new line, D to remove a selected line, or just escape to go back to the main menu. So from here, let's go ahead and boot into our system. That gives you a good idea about how to edit the grub.conf file.